In the everyday chaos of a local market, Peter, a young worker with Down syndrome, struggled to stay calm on his first day at work. But the peace was shattered when an angry customer began humiliating him with cruel words, while everyone around watched in silence, unwilling to step in. What no one knew was that among the customers, a famous Hollywood actor was observing the scene. What he did next would leave everyone speechless. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Peter, a 21-year-old young man with Down syndrome, was always known for his kindness and dedication. Despite his contagious energy, he faced internal battles that few could see. His relationship with his former stepfather, a cold and abusive man, had left deep scars on his self-esteem. Short flashbacks showed Peter as a child, sitting at the table while his stepfather hurled insults. "You'll never amount to anything, boy. Don't even try." The harsh tone and cruel words echoed in his mind as if it were yesterday. But Peter was resilient. Despite it all, he decided he would be stronger than any words meant to diminish him. Today, that spirit of perseverance was his greatest strength. The local market was small but lively, shelves neatly stocked with various products. The sound of carts rolling over the polished floor filled the air. Peter walked through the main door, wearing his uniform with pride. He was greeted by Jack, the manager, who welcomed him with an encouraging smile. "Welcome to the team, Peter. We're happy to have you with us." Peter eagerly shook Jack's hand. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." The training began immediately. Peter was introduced to his tasks, from organizing products to bagging groceries. He listened attentively, mentally noting every detail. His enthusiasm didn't go unnoticed by his colleagues, but neither did their discreet glances and comments about his slower pace. "He's a bit slow, isn't he?" one of the co-workers whispered, unaware that Peter overheard. Peter pretended not to notice and continued his work, determined to prove himself capable. By the end of the shift, he was exhausted but proud of completing his first day. As Peter finished bagging the last customer's groceries, a loud sigh came from the line. He glanced at the clock with relief, realizing his shift was nearly over. However, he didn't notice someone in the line watching with growing impatience. This person's eyes narrowed as Peter continued, oblivious to the tension beginning to rise. The sound of the market's automatic doors sliding open announced the arrival of Karen, a 45-year-old woman with a rigid posture and an air of evident superiority. Her heels echoed across the tiled floor as she walked briskly down the main aisle. Karen wore a stern expression, her face already radiating disapproval before even assessing the situation. She stopped abruptly upon seeing the checkout lines, letting out an exaggerated sigh of irritation. "These stores never know how to organize things," she muttered, loud enough for the other customers to hear. Grabbing a cart, she pushed it forward with urgency, maneuvering through the aisles as though she were in a race. Karen hurriedly selected products, tossing them into the cart without care. Any minor obstacle, like a child in her path or another customer comparing prices, was met with impatient glares and audible scoffs. After filling her cart, Karen headed to the checkout. The line wasn't long, but to someone with so little patience, it felt endless. She joined Peter's line, watching him from a distance as he carefully bagged a previous customer's items. Peter's methodical movements caught Karen's attention. "Is this for real?" she muttered, rolling her eyes. "How can someone this slow be working here?" When it was finally her turn, Karen slammed her items onto the counter, shoving them forward as if to physically express her frustration. Peter greeted her with a polite smile and a timid, "Good morning, ma'am." She responded with a cold glare and a sarcastic tone. "I hope it is good, because I don't have all day." Peter began scanning Karen's items carefully, double-checking the codes and bagging them meticulously. However, her piercing stare seemed to burn into him. Every small movement he made was met with an audible sigh or the impatient tapping of her fingers on the counter. "Is this going to take long?" Karen asked, leaning forward. "Because honestly, it feels like I'm watching this in slow motion." Peter's face turned visibly red, and his hands began to tremble slightly. He tried to move faster, but his nervousness only worsened his coordination. A package slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. He quickly crouched down to retrieve it. "Oh my God, he can't even hold a bag," Karen said loudly, glancing around as if seeking validation from the other customers. Peter kept trying to do his job, but his breathing grew heavier, and it was clear he was on the verge of tears. Karen crossed her arms, leaning even closer to the counter. "Someone needs to do something about this," she said, now raising her voice. "This is ridiculous. I don't have all day to deal with incompetence." A murmur began to rise among the other customers as the tension in the line grew with each passing second. Karen was about to take another step closer to the counter when something unexpected began to shift the atmosphere of the market. Now visibly enraged, she stepped forward and pointed directly at Peter, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is unacceptable. You shouldn't be working here if you can't handle something as simple as bagging groceries. Who hired you?" Because clearly, it was out of pity. Peter's eyes widened at the force of her words. He tried to maintain his composure, but the trembling in his hands grew worse. Meanwhile, Karen turned to the other customers in line looked around, uncertain, as Karen sought allies for her verbal assault. "Do you all see this? We're all being held up because of him," she declared, gesturing dramatically as if putting on a performance. "This is the fast lane, and he is anything but fast." Her cruel words cut through Peter like a blade. He lowered his gaze, trying to focus on the groceries in front of him. But as his nerves took over, another bag slipped from his hands, hitting the tiled floor with a dull thud. The sound only seemed to amplify his humiliation. "Look at that!" Karen exclaimed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "He can't even hold a bag. This is pathetic." Peter swallowed hard, his breath shaky as he tried to compose himself. He knew he needed to finish the transaction, but the pressure and embarrassment were becoming unbearable. His eyes flickered toward Jack, the manager, who was across the store, busy with another task. Karen's harsh words triggered painful memories from Peter's past. He was suddenly transported back to his childhood, sitting at the kitchen table while his stepfather's cruel voice rang in his ears. "You'll never get anything right, boy. You're dead weight, and everyone knows it." In the memory, Peter shrank into himself, trying to disappear, but the insults always found him. Now, standing in front of Karen, he felt the same tightness in his throat, the same helplessness. "I just want to help," he whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible. Karen, noticing how shaken Peter was, stepped even closer. She pointed a sharp finger at him, her voice laced with irritation. "Someone needs to teach you how to do a real job. You're holding everyone up," she snapped, her words echoing through the store. A murmur rippled through the line. Some customers exchanged quiet glances, while others shifted uncomfortably. A few pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the scene. Peter parted his lips, trying to form words, but nothing came out. His chest felt tight, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Just then, the sound of firm footsteps approaching the checkout line cut through the tense atmosphere. Karen, still glaring at Peter, was suddenly interrupted. The store, once filled with the usual hum of cashiers, the clatter of carts, and the quiet buzz of conversations, seemed to fall into an uneasy silence. The weight of the moment hung in the air, pressing down on everyone. All eyes turned toward the checkout line, where Karen stood with her arms flailing, her sharp voice ringing out. "This is an insult to my time," she shouted, throwing up her hands in exaggerated frustration. "I can't believe I have to deal with this." The other customers averted their eyes, either staring down at their phones or pretending to browse the shelves, unwilling to get involved. At the back of the line, an older woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Isn't someone going to do something? That poor boy looks so lost." Her husband shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. We don't want to cause trouble, do we?" Karen, on the other hand, remained oblivious to the growing discomfort around her. Fueled by her own indignation, her voice only grew louder as Peter's patience visibly wore thin. The once welcoming market now felt suffocating to him. His heart pounded as he glanced around, seeing a mix of judgmental, pitying, and indifferent expressions. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed too bright, blurring his vision, making him feel even more exposed. Karen continued her tirade, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. She made sure to emphasize every word, ensuring the other customers heard her. "This is what we're paying for. This kind of service? He's way too slow. This is completely unacceptable." The tension in the line was almost tangible. Some customers tried to ignore it, while others nervously glanced between Karen and Peter, silently hoping someone would step in. Peter, his hands still trembling, focused on finishing bagging the groceries. He took a shaky breath and finally summoned the courage to speak. His voice was soft, almost inaudible, but full of sincerity. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm trying my best." Karen turned on him instantly, leaning over the counter with a sneer. "Trying? That's not enough. Not for a job like this," she snapped. "People have schedules to keep, and you're wasting everyone's time." Peter dropped his gaze, unable to find the words to defend himself. His hands, already unsteady, let another bag slip to the floor. The sound echoed through the market, magnifying his embarrassment. Karen let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oh my God! He can't even hold a bag. This is pathetic." Some customers began exchanging uneasy glances. A younger man in the middle of the line hesitated before discreetly pulling out his phone, hitting record. He turned to the woman beside him and whispered, "This is awful, but who's going to stop her?" The woman bit her lip, her expression troubled. "She's so aggressive. I don't want to get involved." Meanwhile, at the back of the line, an older woman adjusted her purse on her shoulder. She took a step forward, hesitated, then glanced at Peter with sympathy. The weight of the decision to act pressed down on her. Karen, seeing no one contradicting her, took it as encouragement to continue. She turned back to Peter, her voice louder, harsher. "If you can't do this job, then go do something else. Someone needs to tell you that." Peter, visibly shaken, kept his focus on the task at hand. His breaths came shallow, the air feeling thin. His hands, slick with sweat, struggled to keep a grip on the bags. His gaze stayed fixed on the counter, avoiding Karen's piercing stare. Across the store, Jack, the manager, finally sensed that something was wrong. His brows furrowed as he glanced toward Peter's checkout line. Though too far away to hear what was being said, he could see the tension thickening. Frowning, he started making his way toward the commotion. As Jack made his way toward the commotion, he was briefly stopped by another customer asking for assistance. Meanwhile, Karen continued her rant, arms crossed as she turned to the other customers in line, seeking validation. "Do you all see this?" she exclaimed. "We're all being delayed because of him. It's absurd that someone like this is working in a fast lane." The murmurs in the line grew louder, but still, no one had the courage to speak up. Each passing second felt heavier, stretching the tension to its breaking point. The discomfort in the air was almost unbearable. Just beyond the aisle, partially hidden by shelves of neatly stacked goods, a man stood watching. His posture was relaxed, but his expression remained unreadable. Dressed simply, he blended in with the crowd, but his eyes stayed locked on the unfolding scene. He crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly as if analyzing every detail. There was no shock on his face, only quiet contemplation, as though he had seen something like this before. Peter, still focused on his task, was unaware of the man's presence. But he could feel it, a subtle shift in the air around him, as if the crushing weight of the situation was on the verge of being balanced, though he had no idea how. Karen, however, remained completely oblivious. Her entire focus was locked on Peter, feeding off her own outrage. The store, once filled with the casual hum of checkout beeps and cart wheels gliding over tile, now felt suffocating under the weight of unspoken tension. Still, no one intervened. The man who had been quietly observing took a step forward, becoming more visible to the customers in line. His gaze remained fixed on Karen, his presence suddenly noticeable. A few customers turned toward him, sensing that something was about to shift. Peter, unaware of what was happening, lifted his eyes for a brief moment, and met the man's gaze. There was something in it, a steady calm, a quiet strength. For the first time since the ordeal began, Peter felt a flicker of relief, even if he didn't understand why. Karen was about to speak again, her voice rising, when the man took another step forward. And then, "That's enough." The words cut through the thick atmosphere like a blade. The market, so heavy with tension, seemed to hold its breath. Everyone turned, searching for the source of the unexpected interruption. Karen froze, caught off guard. From across the aisle, a tall man with a confident but unhurried stride walked toward the scene. He didn't rush, but there was something about his presence that immediately drew every eye in the store. The once still customers in line began whispering among themselves. "Who is that?" a woman asked, squinting. "Wait, is that him?" a younger man murmured, already pulling out his phone to record. And then, as the man stepped fully into view, the recognition settled over the crowd like a wave. Keanu Reeves. Dressed simply in a casual shirt and pants, he could have gone unnoticed anywhere else. But not here. Not now. His presence was unmistakable. Karen, still clinging to her anger, narrowed her eyes at him, her irritation now laced with confusion. "And you think you can just show up and tell me how to act?" she snapped, sarcasm coating her words. But there was something else buried beneath it, uncertainty. Keanu stopped just a few steps away. His expression was composed, his voice steady. "I'm not here to tell you how to act," he said. "I'm saying that what you're doing right now is wrong." Karen blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Wrong? You don't even know what's going on here." "I'm just stating facts. This boy is holding everyone up." A small smile flickered across Keanu's lips, though the intensity in his gaze never wavered. "The facts," he repeated. "The fact is, he's doing his job. And you've chosen to humiliate him for it. There's a big difference between stating facts and using them as a weapon." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, but this time, the attention had shifted away from Peter. Karen could feel it. Peter, still frozen behind the counter, stared at Keanu with wide, uncertain eyes. He had no idea why this man was stepping in, but for the first time since the ordeal began, he felt like someone had heard him, someone had seen him. Keanu turned toward him, his expression softening. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice calm, reassuring. Peter hesitated, his throat dry. Peter," he stammered. Keanu nodded. "Peter, you're doing a great job here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." He placed a hand gently on Peter's shoulder, a gesture of quiet solidarity, as if transferring some of his unwavering confidence to him. "We all have tough days, Keanu continued, but those don't define who we are. Do you understand that? Peter nodded slowly, his eyes burning with unshed tears. He couldn't find the words to respond, but the suffocating weight he had felt moments ago suddenly seemed a little lighter. Karen, now visibly uncertain, crossed her arms and let out a short, nervous laugh. Look, I don't know who you think you are, she scoffed, but this has nothing to do with you. I just want fast service, and he's clearly not up to the job. Keanu's expression grew more serious as he turned to her. I'm someone who believes in respect, he said. And it doesn't cost anything to be kind. You've clearly lost sight of that. Karen let out another scoff, but the bite in her voice had dulled. I have the right to be frustrated. I'm wasting my time here. Keanu nodded slightly. You absolutely have the right to feel frustrated. What you don't have is the right to take that frustration out on someone who's done nothing to deserve it. Especially someone who's here to help. The air in the store shifted. For the first time, the customers, who had stood in silent discomfort, began to stir. A woman in the middle of the line suddenly raised her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. A voice rose from the crowd, clear and unwavering. He's right. It's not fair to treat the young man like this. Another customer, standing closer to Karen, nodded in agreement. We're all waiting in line, and no one else is complaining. What makes you think you're different? Murmurs of support rippled through the store. One by one, people began to speak up, their voices joining together like a growing tide. Karen looked around, expecting validation, but instead, she found herself surrounded by disapproving stares. The support she had assumed was hers had vanished. Instead, people were shaking their heads, their phones still recording, capturing the moment as it unfolded. The energy in the market had completely shifted. What had once been a scene of oppression had become a moment of unity. Keanu turned back to Peter, his expression kind but steady. Keep being yourself, he said, offering the young man a reassuring smile. Because who you are is already more than enough. Peter swallowed hard, unable to find words, but the weight in his chest felt a little lighter. As Keanu walked toward the exit, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't just for him, it was for the moment, for what it had come to represent. The rhythmic click of Karen's heels faded as she stormed toward the automatic doors, her presence swallowed by the city beyond. For a brief second, silence hung in the air. Then, all at once, the store came back to life. She had no right to talk to him like that, an older woman muttered to the person beside her. That was incredible, someone else marveled. I never imagined someone like Keanu Reeves would show up here. Peter remained behind the counter, still frozen in place. He looked down at his trembling hands, struggling to process how a moment of humiliation had transformed into something so powerful. A firm but gentle hand landed on his shoulder. It was Jack, the market manager. He had finally arrived, his face full of concern. Are you okay, Peter? Peter lifted his head, his breath still unsteady, but this time, there was something different in his eyes. A quiet strength that hadn't been there before. He managed a small smile. Yeah. I think I am. Keanu's words echoed in his mind. Your worth isn't measured by how quickly you bag groceries. Your worth is who you are. Peter took a deep breath, one that felt like releasing a weight he had carried for far too long. And as he returned to work, something unexpected happened. The customers in line weren't just standing idly anymore. They were engaging with him, treating him with warmth and kindness. You're doing a great job, Peter, a woman said as she handed him her items. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. A man behind her gave Peter a nod of approval. Hey, son, keep it up. You've got more courage than most people out there. Each small word of encouragement felt like a brick, slowly rebuilding the foundation of Peter's confidence, one piece at a time. The entire atmosphere of the store had changed. Where there had once been silent bystanders, there was now a community. People chatted as they waited, sharing stories, laughing. A sense of solidarity filled the air, something rare and precious. A young woman, still holding her phone, approached Jack with excitement in her voice. "That was amazing. Did you see how he handled everything?" she asked. "You should post this on social media, people need to know how incredible Peter is." Jack smiled, nodding. "I agree." He glanced at Peter. "But right now, the most important thing is making sure he knows that." For the first time in a long time, Peter felt something unfamiliar but wonderful, belonging. When his shift ended, he walked to the locker room, his steps slow and thoughtful. Sitting on a wooden bench, he stared at his uniform, running his fingers over the fabric. For so long, he had believed he was invisible. That people only saw his mistakes, his differences. But today had changed something. Today, someone had seen him. Keanu's words had lit a spark inside him, one he hadn't realized was there. Pride. Not in his job, not in what he did, but in who he was. He remembered his mother's words that morning, "You're important to this family, Peter." Now, for the first time, he was starting to believe it. Outside the market, Keanu walked calmly toward a parked car. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't need applause. For him, this was just another day of doing what he believed was right. Before getting in, he glanced back at the market one last time. And he smiled. Because he knew, this moment wasn't about him. It was about Peter. And about the way a single act of kindness could change a day, maybe even a life. The next morning, the world took notice. The video of Keanu standing up for Peter went viral. Millions shared it, the hashtags #RespectForPeter and #KindnessMatters flooding social media. People who had been in the store that day recounted their experiences, inspiring others to reflect on how small choices, one moment, one word, could have a profound impact. Peter, who had once been afraid of being noticed, had become a symbol of resilience and strength. And as the story came to a close, a simple truth remained. Every day gives us the opportunity to be kind, to lift others up instead of tearing them down. No matter how small an action seems, it can ripple outward in ways we may never fully understand. In the end, we are all responsible for creating a world where respect and empathy are the norm, not the exception. The next morning, as Peter walked to the market, something felt different. The weight of cruel words that had once haunted him was gone. In its place were the words of kindness and support he had received the day before. When he stepped inside, customers in the checkout line turned to him with warm smiles. "Good morning, Peter. Hope you're having a great day." "You're doing awesome, Peter." And for the first time, Peter smiled back. Genuinely, fully. Because he finally knew. He wasn't alone. He never had been. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.